Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and I just got back from 3 weeks abroad, and I'm happy to be back at home and making new videos. So with that in mind, I thought it'd be fun to, instead of taking a look at someone else's deck, is to take a look at my favorite deck, Breena the Demagogue, and see what makes this my favorite commander and my favorite deck. Now you may have heard me talk about Breena in other videos or talk about the tools she has, or you may have watched me play Breena on MTG Mudsta's channel. Breena is by far one of my favorite commanders and honestly just a delight to play. But before we get any further and take a look at Breena herself, this is a good time to remind you that the deck list, my deck list, will be in the video description down below. And I just wanted to thank you all for liking, subscribing, and supporting me as we're almost at 1,500 subscribers, which is mind-blowing. Thank you so much. And let's take a look at Breena and see what she does. There's a lot to like about Breena the Demagogue, and a lot that kind of feeds my brain of what I love to play in Commander. She is a low mana cost commander. She's 3 mana, so comes out early, and often I think she comes out every game. She has evasion naturally, 1/3. She grows in power often, and she's in the best colors, if you ask me, in black and white. But one of the big things about her is she's kind of lumped into this strange area of a political commander, when which she really is, in my mind, is an aggressive commander, an aggro commander, or a card draw engine commander. Not quite as powerful as something like Tymna, but I would say pretty close. The political side from her is mainly because her card drawing doesn't just come to you, but also gives cards to your opponents, which sometimes is seen as kind of a bad thing. I get that, but the way you use her allows you to be, and the way that ability works is you're still benefiting every time your opponents trigger her ability, and you are getting ahead with bigger and bigger creatures. When I play this deck, it's pretty normal to have a group of creatures that are easily like 6/6s or bigger while drawing 3 to 4 cards every single turn. Yes, my opponents are also drawing cards occasionally, but actually the more I play with my stronger, friends and stronger pods, they don't tend to trigger her because they're worried about the +1/+1 counters that she gets, or I get. So it really only triggers on my turn, so I'm the one drawing off of it. It's just a good time all around. Breena is a 3 mana Orzhov Bird Warlock. She is a 1/3 flyer with one slightly confusing but very strong ability. In fact, before I even explain the ability, I would say the thing that holds back Breena the most when you play her is your opponent's understanding of what she does. If you don't explain it, they don't get it usually. Because it is a very complicated ability, and if you're playing more casual pods, they might not even know the opportunity they're being given, which is why on every combat, I let my opponents know what Breena would do if they timed their attacks correctly, which is a huge boon because usually they end up triggering her to my benefit. So what is this ability? Breena says that whenever a player attacks one of your opponents that doesn't have the lowest life total, that player draws a card. Then you, the owner of Breena, put 2 +1/+1 counters on one of your creatures. What does that look like? Well, that looks like that whenever you attack one of your opponents, you're going to get the full benefit of 2 +1/+1 counters, and you draw a card. But as you might have figured out, you have 3 opponents, and one of them tends to have lower life than the other 2, which means you actually do this twice per turn cycle, where you get 2 +1/+1 counter packets twice, so 4 total +1/+1 counters, and you draw 2 cards, which is an insane advantage if you consider, okay, this is silly, but that's a divination. I know divination's not a great card, but that's a free divination on a really good creature, and then every turn cycle, you get more and more out of her. This is a fantastic ability and allows you to both scale your creatures upwards prior to them dealing damage, because it's not when they hit your opponents, it's when they attack, but also gets you ahead on card advantage. This isn't even including the fact that when you are using Breena in the turn cycle, you can get your opponents to trigger that first part of that trigger. In fact, in most situations, you can tell your opponent, hey, if you attack other player, you'll draw a card. And with that, you will get a +1/+1, 2 +1/+1 counters onto one of your creatures, let's say Breena. Something that's worth noting about this is it is possible for your opponents to get 2 triggers as well. If they are your opponent with the lowest life total, then they are able to attack both your other opponents, get 2 triggers, and you get those 2 triggers for the +1/+1 counters, which is really good. This usually happens, I've said here, 1 to 3 times a turn cycle. It's not guaranteed. Your opponents have to be willing to do it. They have to want cards, they have to have creatures to attack, and they have to have not the highest life or tied with the highest life total. Because if you have 2 opponents with the highest life total and 1 lower, both of those opponents do not have I know they can attack each other. How does this work? I think they can't be all tied. That's what it is. So most of the time, if they are able to, you can get another trigger. So when you think about this, Breena can trigger, let's say, this main ability twice, and then I would usually average 1 to 2 times a turn cycle. You get 2 +1/+1 counters again. If you add that together, that's like what, 8 +1/+1 counters, 2 cards for you and 1 card to each of your opponents per turn cycle for no mana cost, no upkeep cost, just keeping Breena on the battlefield is phenomenal. It's really, really good. As mentioned before, there is one kind of play around here where you do not want your opponents to have the same health total. If they all have the same health total, you can't actually trigger Breena, which is kind of a problem, especially in starting the game. That first point of damage towards any of your opponents, whether they use fetch lands, whether they use shock lands, whether you get an attack in, whether they attack each other, but it's crucial to get Breena going. It's also worth noting that Breena doesn't do anything if you have a single opponent. I know this is kind of a dumb thing, but like, don't play her one-on-one. I have played her one-on-one because the deck itself is so strong and I love it so much, but it's basically not a commander when you only have one opponent. I would just if you're playing one-on-one, just swap her out for like Timna or something and you'll have pretty much the same experience without, losing too much. But when Breena gets going, oh boy, is it a blast. What's great about this is it happens really, really early and immediately should turn 2 of your creatures into bigger threats, making them from like 1/1s to 3/3s, 2/2s to 4/4s, or pile all the counters on Breena or another one for a very big evasive creature or a very big smasher really, really early. As I mentioned before, what's kind of important for this deck to function is creatures. You need creatures to attack with, but you also need creatures to do that initial damage point to one of your opponents so the Breena ball can get rolling. I think there's a lot of different angles that you can go with your creatures. These are 3 creatures just as a general thing that are in the deck that I really like. I think you're generally happy with looking at Changeling Outcast, any form of evasive creatures for 1 mana. Black has a lot of these, Changeling Outcast and there's a spirit equivalent, are very good as being unblockable threats where you can just smash face, but you can also have just general evasion on a 1 mana black creature, from menace to flying. Anything like that can be very, very good because it just enables you to start getting those few points in, and then as you put +1/+1 counters onto those creatures go from being like Breena triggerers to just threats. If you've ever seen a Changeling Outcast that's like an 8/8 or a 10/10, you know how dangerous that can be. As for the other types of creatures, Mindblade Renderer and other kind of, like Dark Confidant, Keen Duelist, these kind of card draw creatures who have a lot of benefit in attacking. I know there's 2 different black creatures that will generate a treasure on attack, and there's a bunch of white creatures that when they attack will generate like small things, are all really, really good because their main advantage of just like getting triggers out of attacks or taking advantage of like combat is just basically amplified by Breena. And of course, in the last little zone here, we have like Dusk Legion Duelist, where it's just really good to have creatures that obviously work with, like the +1/+1 counter synergy. I don't think you need to, though I'm going to get into it a bit later, really, really go deep into +1/+1 counters for this to be good. It turns out +1/+1 counters on most creatures is just generally a huge boon because creatures are, it's a dumb thing to say, creatures are balanced around their stats. Mind-blowing. And so if you can very cheaply alter those stats, you're going to be very, very happy. So most creatures will benefit from this, but cards like Dusk Legion Duelist, and I know there's a bunch others in white and in black actually, that will gain abilities or will trigger things when +1/+1 counters are put onto them, is just a kind of nice gravy. I think Dusk Legion Duelist is one of the two that really cares about +1/+1 counters more than anything else in the deck, and she by herself is just so powerful. Even if it just means you're drawing one extra card with Breena per turn cycle is pretty good. But realistically, whenever your opponents trigger Breena, you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Dusk Legion Duelist on another turn, therefore triggering it again. Fantastic, you're going to draw so many cards. Something recently I've also been trying is what I'm going to say are pseudo creatures. Creatures that don't necessarily count as creatures but are still very strong cards to be put into the deck. Here's just 3 examples, and what I really like about them is they all do something else and they all provide a body. Obviously, Legion's Landing is a very cheap 1-mana 1/1 creature that when you attack with 3 creatures, it becomes a land. This is ramp, and it's rather good. I actually don't have one of these in my deck, and I probably should. Case of the Stash Skeleton is a new addition that I probably need to test more, but it gives you a 2/1 creature with Menace, which I'm perfectly fine with playing. And then later in the game, after a board wipe, after you've lost your skeleton, you get to sacrifice this to tutor a card from your deck into your hand, which I also am pretty happy to do. I think Case of the Stash Skeleton was like this card that people were talking about was just gonna, be really good. I don't think that's the case, but if you are in the market for a 2/1 Menace for any reason, which this deck is reasonably in the market for, Case of the Stash Skeleton makes a good case for it. Finally, Glimmer Lens is a card that I've always liked. Once again, one of those cards that I thought was very much so hyped on release, but I don't really see it around. It's just another white, card draw equipment, which I think we've gotten quite a bit of these in the last little bit, so maybe it's just kind of fallen to the wayside, but I see it as a 2-mana 2/2 that when you attack with this creature and one other creature, which is really easy to trigger, you just get another card. And this is a card that you can immediately equip to something else, or if the creature dies, you get to keep the lens. All of this text is just really good, making it a very valuable kind of permanent to be played. After this, when it comes to Breena, you can just basically choose any theme in black-white colors and do really well. I know I just covered a few creatures and explained Breena, and you might be like, well, don't we need more of a backbone for Breena to function? And the answer is really no. I think this is once again where the political angle of Breena kind of holds her back. I think players tend to see political commanders and they want to funnel them into a politics deck. They want to play the ghostly prisons. They want to play, certain effects that encourage opponents to attack each other more. But you don't need any of that. You have Breena. She is the political lead and end of that politics for the deck in a lot of ways. She gives your opponents reasons to attack each other, and that's all you need. You don't need anything else to kind of go forward. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still a few cards that can be considered somewhat political within the deck, but I think generally it's not something you should really lean on. I think you should look at other themes. As mentioned before, +1/+1 counters is a very deep pool you can go into, especially in black-white, which are both secondary in +1/+1 counters, in my opinion. You can't get the really cool trample things, but you can get flying, you can get lifelink, you can get menace, all these on +1/+1 creatures. There's a bunch of proliferate you can get very cheaply. There's a bunch of really good equipment. There's a bunch of really good enchantments that you can all theme together into that deck and make it a full kind of +1/+1 counter theme. Aristocrats, my favorite child of Magic by far, is also very accessible here, because taking that Blood Artist that's a 0/1 or that Zulaport Cutthroat that's a 1/1 and giving it 2 +1/+1 counters makes it, I'm not gonna say a threat, but an attacker. Right? One of the biggest problems back in the day is those 0/1s can't attack profitably, and they're the most valuable parts of your board, and therefore you don't want to attack. But the second you start making them 2/3s, the second you start making them 4/5s, all of a sudden you can attack with them and you don't particularly mind. This gives you a really good way to just build your aristocrat board while still being in the game. Reanimator, I don't think there's anything Reanimator can't fit in. I love Reanimator. It's such a fun thing to do. And once again, My version of the deck has some Reanimator because we're in black, we should be using it, but not in a huge theme. Now, this doesn't jive as well with Breena because Breena herself doesn't have a great kind of like milling, discard, reanimation effect on her, but the ability just to draw enough cards to either force discard, which happens a lot more than you think, or just like, you know, set up the cards in your hand so you can go off by, you know, buried alive, victimized kind of combo and win the game or get very far ahead, is still accessible. That's probably the most suspect one, but, you know, still good. Good old aggro, or what I would say also is general good stuff, is kind of the direction I've gone with Breena, and I think is probably the most fun, but the other themes are also just generally there for you. I'm sure there's other themes I haven't mentioned or haven't thought of. I'm sure an equipment theme would work actually really, really well with her. I'm sure some kind of weird tokens would probably work, though I don't know how good that is because you're kind of going tall instead of wide. I don't know. Someone try it and report back. But what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of room for this deck to run what you want. So what do I want and what am I running? Here's my deck list, and we're going to just look at it very briefly. You can once again look in the description down below to find out exactly what I built together. I built it with a really low curve. This is kind of a good stuff deck. It's got tutors, it's got like really disruptive low mana creatures. It doesn't have Drannith Magistrate, but it absolutely could. They were just being used for modern. I've tried to keep it effective and quick. I'm not very, very big on ramping these days in Commander, and I actually cut out the most of the ramp, but I put it back in at the last second because I do want to try it a bit longer. But Orzhov Signet and Talisman of Hierarchy are like really close to being cut because the deck runs so low to the ground that I don't really think you need these things. And generally, you are getting every land drop because you're drawing 3 to 4 cards a turn. Likewise, your biggest threats at 6 and 7 mana are very easy to reanimate through using something like Entomb and Animate Dead, or you actual factual reanimate if you have it. And these cards are just very, very accessible. Having low mana cards also allows us to more confidently run Dark Confidant. And the newer, where are you? Dark Star Augur, a card I really do want to try, and I hope it's going to be very good. I love drawing cards, and this deck is absolutely here for it. So let's look at the finishers I've chosen for the deck. I've got 2 kind of value finishers that we're looking at right now, and then I've got a combo finisher that we'll see on the next slide. Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite never stops being an incredibly powerful card. I think I saw a comment a little while ago about how she's an obvious choice or win more. I can't disagree any further. Elesh Norn is a card that I barely see anymore. I think I get it because we've gotten so many really, really strong tools and so many different ways for white to top its curve, or other ways to kind of get huge advantage. But Elesh Norn represents so much value just by hitting the board for an instant. She can die or get exiled the moment after, but if she touches the board, you are getting away with like destroying a ton of creatures most of the time. The board wipe capabilities obviously is very much so more against like token decks or things like that, but if she stays on the battlefield, she is shutting down cards in your opponent's hand and at the same time boosting your team. As mentioned before, the idea of all these +1/+1 counters is to turn all these smaller creatures into more threatening versions of themselves and smash face with them. And Elesh Norn does a pretty good, maybe even I'd say a pretty reliable interpretation of that kind of effect. On the other hand, with our other Praetor, Sheoldred works almost in the opposite direction that Elesh Norn does, where Elesh Norn is very good on a wide board that you will want to make like one big swing and defeat all your opponents. Sheoldred works better in a narrow board where your opponents don't have a lot of creatures and you are building towards like the longer game. Sheoldred's immediate effect, much like Elesh Norn when she hits the battlefield, gives you quite a bit of card advantage. Your opponents all sacrifice a non-token creature and you've just gotten a 3-for-1 for 5 mana. But the second you have 5 additional mana and the amount of cards in your opponent's graveyards, you can flip Sheoldred, and the True Scriptures is where she's actually a finisher. Every aspect of the True Scriptures is incredibly powerful, from destroying 3 more creatures, to forcing 3 discards on each of your opponents, to the final Rise of the Dark Realms effect, to then the second that Rise of the Dark Realms effect finishes triggering, Sheoldred comes back into play and therefore triggers again. It's just insane. Sheoldred is so powerful. If not for the fact that she's somewhat like overshadowed by her 4-mana version, I think this card is just bonkers, and I would play her basically in any deck that wants a 5-mana value win con. But what about the combo side? Well, I wanted a way to kind of finish the game immediately, or threaten to finish the game immediately, that was more in tune of what the deck is trying to do and can be built out of, you know, a tutor here or an entomb there. And that was Ruthless Technomancer and Marionette Master. Now, you can kind of remove Ruthless Technomancer from this, but it doesn't work as well. Marionette Master is very strong by herself, but I want treasure tokens. Now, we have Smothering Tide, that's something we could use. We have other ways to make treasure tokens, and depending on your build, you can definitely have artifacts as a build, but I want a bunch of artifacts that can sacrifice themselves at instant speed, and Ruthless Technomancer is really good at that. You can use this to sacrifice any creature, and if you get like 5 or more power out of that creature with 5 or more treasures, Marionette is going to do, what, 15 damage if you fabricate onto her. And those are big, like those are the floor, right? The way this deck works is by putting +1/+1 counters on our creatures, which works well with both halves of this combo. Ruthless Technomancer, whatever it eats, if you put a bunch of you put 8 +1/+1 counters onto, I don't know, like a Giver of Runes, and you realize you'd rather the 8 treasures, Ruthless Technomancer comes in, sacrifices the 9 power creature, and gets 9 treasures immediately. And then if you have 3 mana, right, and then sacrifice 1 artifact, you can just bring back that Giver. Like, Ruthless Technomancer is an insane card. I really like it. But the same clause applies to the Marionette Master. The Marionette Master is, you know, generally a 4/6, which does a lot of damage. But what if you keep putting the +1/+1 counters off of Breena onto the Marionette Master? I've easily had it at like 12 power or something before, and you just are threatening immediately destroying the entire field or defeating all your opponents if you have enough treasures. Which can be tricky, because you do need enough treasures to stop your 3 opponents that are now, you know, working together against you. But remember, if your opponent casts something on the stack and you kill them on the stack, their spells fizzle, and therefore you have a way to stop your opponents interacting with you. It's not perfect. I do understand it only kills opponents 1 at a time, but it's very fun, and I don't think it's something a lot of opponents will see coming out of a Breena deck. After this, we kind of get into more of like the kind of good stuff that I just wanted to throw, you know, out there. Giver of Runes, Mother of Runes are both creatures that are both 1 mana and can attack, which are good with Breena, but are protective for the rest of your creatures, including Breena. And Unearth, Animate, Dead effects are really good at bringing our stuff back, especially Breena herself back onto the battlefield. Once again, because we do not need her to do damage, Breena coming out with 0 power because of Animate Dead is not a problem at all. The other general good stuff from Esper Sentinel, Lothos, Drannith Magistrates, and Thalias, you know how this goes, you know what this means. Generally, the idea is that if you put more of these into your deck will climb in power, and if you put less of these into the deck, your deck will reduce in power. It's pretty straightforward. I never just want to suggest Esper Sentinels or like Smothering Tides, or these kind of cards that have quite a price onto them, or even Drannith Magistrate, which is very polarizing. But I do want to bring to attention that these are strong cards, and I like playing these cards. If you can't budget for these cards and your playgroup doesn't play proxies, having creatures that do similar things, leaning into the +1/+1 counter element of the deck, they're still going to do well. Breena still works really well, but these are the cards that I think flow the best with her. And of course, as mentioned before, cards like Tymna the Weaver, Gix, other draw cards are the cards I really like to play. I even have the new Teysa in here. I don't know how good she is. I haven't had a chance to actually play her, but I think she'd do very well in this deck. You just do have to crack the clues, and I guess those artifacts have some synergy with Marionette Master. I'm not sure, but like, I love these 3 mana. Like, when you attack players, you get to draw cards, and Gix themselves, Gix should really be in that pile of like Sheoldred, Elish Norn as the finisher, because Gix is just insane in this deck. You can easily post-combat have 11 to 12 cards in your hand, and then just use Gix's ability, discard 12 cards, and cast the top 12 cards off one of your opponent's decks. Really, really powerful, especially if you have like treasures and you can do it like repeatedly over a few turns. You're going to have a very, very good time. Special mention to Delny. I just opened like 2 boxes of Murders recently, which I was very happy to do, and grab some Surveil lands, but I got a copy of Delny and I really want to try them. There's this element to this card that works so well with Breena because it doubles Breena's ability, it makes your creatures unblockable, it doubles their abilities, all of which are really, really powerful, but only works as long as they stay small. Right? Like, if you start putting +1/+1 counters onto Breena or Esper Sentinel, all of a sudden it no longer works and with Delny, and then, you know, you just kind of invalidated Delny. But that might not be a problem, because even one attack where you get double triggers out of Breena might be enough to like rocket you into the like late game while your opponents are still in the early game. Maybe that's enough. Or alternatively, what I've been thinking of is you just put all the +1/+1 counters onto Delny, making Delny the just beast of a creature while you're drawing so many cards. I don't know. I'm really excited to find out, though. I think like this card works really, really well in like how the deck functions as it is. And even beyond that, I think it's a creature that can attack, so I like it. I like them in Breena, so I'm excited to find out. Going to the more boring, but like, you know, necessary part of the decks, we've got removal, you know, the classic Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Generous Gift, Stroke of Midnight. You know these cards, play these cards. I mentioned it before, but recently there's been this kind of discussion that I've heard of where like we're talking about the necessity of playing the same really powerful removal cards. I don't know, man. I think people just don't play enough removal, and if I get Breena, Swords to Plowshare, and Path to Exile over and over again, I think my opponents are doing the right thing. So I'm not one to judge too much, but your mileage will vary. Something that's not here and not in the deck, but I've been thinking about, and I think I've mentioned this before, but is Dismember. I'm starting to think of Dismember as being like on the same tier of Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. It is a 1 mana, colorless removal spell that you get to play when you're in black. And I think that's really, really good. I think oftentimes 1 mana to just remove your opponent's commander is good enough, if not to remove, you know, a number of key creatures, I think is worth doing. And then later in the game, I guess you can pay mana for it. I don't know, I've never done that. I like spending my life, so you'll have to tell me what it's like to spend 3 mana on a Dismember. A big one to mention is Retribution of the Ancients. This is maybe leaning into that kind of zone where you might have thought of this when you saw the +1/+1 counter like theming, but even without that theme, Retribution of the Ancients is bonkers. It is 1 black mana to destroy a creature every single time. And if you're like, well, Cursed, what about like getting all the +1/+1 counters? You'll have the +1/+1 counters. Don't even worry about it. And you don't need them all on the same permanent. If you have 30 creatures with a +1/+1 counter on them each, which good job, by the way, this just works in the same way. It's just among creatures you control. Oftentimes, you don't even remove that many +1/+1 counters. The ability to snipe down key targets is more what you want, where you can pay 1 black, like, you know, you go through the turn cycle and you have like 2 black remaining before it's your turn, and you just activate Retribution of the Ancients twice, removing a +1/+1 counter here and 2 +1/+1 counters there to remove like 2 key creatures or 2 just powerful creatures that you want to get rid of, or use it as a combat trick on someone else's combat, for example. Amazing card. I have never been disappointed to have this on the battlefield, and I really, really recommend trying this out if you haven't. It's mind-blowing this has only been printed once. It is still so cheap. Board clears, you know what this is about, you know what they do. I'm not going to talk too much about them. There's a lot of variants in the ones you can play. These are the ones I like. Tragic Arrogance is a very, very fun card that I really recommend to people to try. But that could also just be that could be Damnation or Wrath of God, and you'd have a great time. Coming to the end of the video, we've got my favorite section of weird stuff I like. Once again, if you've seen my Eiley video, this shouldn't be a surprise. Curse of Silence is a card I really, really like, and I hope more people run because it's just very, very strong. It is a 1-mana card that puts immediate commander tax onto one of your opponent's commanders, and when they do cast it, you have the choice to cycle the Curse of Silence or keep it on the battlefield to continue the pressure. I recently played a game against combo slivers, where Curse of Silence did a big part of keeping their commander off of the battlefield. Just the ability to hold on to more time to deal with something is just very good. Curse of Silence's main problem has always been knowing the card your opponents are going to cast, and in Commander, they're guaranteed to cast at least one card every game. Duelist Heritage is another card that I do really, really like. It is probably the most suspect one on this list. It's just very, very powerful. This is the other political card that I wanted to bring up. The ability to slam this down and just force more damage through to your opponents by just amplifying the creatures that attack the other creatures is really, really good. But if they know the prisoner's dilemma, they won't fall for this and they'll just continue to attack you anyway. So there are circumstances where this does nothing. However, playing Duelist Heritage and having like a 6/6 on board already and just attacking, or that's not even, you don't even need that. You have a 2/2 and you have Breena and you play Duelist Heritage and you attack correctly, that 2/2 becomes a 6/6, right? And giving that 6/6 double strike, that's just very, very meaningful. It will take chunks out of your opponents. It works really well with Breena with flying. It's a great card. I just know if you told me, well, Curse, can you take one card out of this deck? I'd say Duelist Heritage. Well, I'd say the Mana Rocks first, but then I'd say Duelist Heritage immediately after. This is suspect. Something that's a lot less suspect, but I don't see anywhere outside of like dedicated mill decks, is Scheming Symmetry. This is used sometimes in like Modern or other formats to like trigger Archive Trap or something. Don't worry about that. Scheming Symmetry's just power is the fact that you can just put a card onto your deck, your opponent gets one card, and then because of the way your deck works with Breena, you can immediately draw that card and use it in your second main phase. It's cute. I like it. I like tutors a lot. Anyone who tells me that tutors makes Commander unfun, we'll have a discussion about that. Yeah. And if you want those kind of discussions, if you want to hear my hot takes, let me know. I'll definitely make videos on hot takes. Of course, the weird card I like in this deck that I think stands out the most is Inkshield. Inkshield is a hell of a card. If you've ever seen Inkshield in action, you know how powerful this is. No one expects the fog coming from you, and it does work. Its ability to turn a very lethal attack into your lethal attack in the coming turn is just phenomenal. It works better in other decks, mainly like Spellslinger, Instant Speed, or High Mana Creation or Token decks, than it does here. But that doesn't matter, because Inkshield is just that good. Just remember to use it correctly, right? You gotta kind of bluff. You gotta be a bit of a bluffer. If you just hold up 5 mana every turn and your opponents know your deck, it'll never go off. But Inkshield, it's never disappointed me, I'm gonna be honest. It's such a fun card. And as far as I can tell from this icon, it just got reprinted, so pick one up while you still can. And that's my Breena deck. There's so much more I can talk about. I see that Invasion of Gobakhan's in here. I love Priest of the Fellrights. There's so even Imp's Mischief. It's just a card I love so much, but I'm gonna leave you the fun of looking through the rest of the deck list. I really think Breena is due for a comeback. I've obviously built a particularly strong version of her, and it could be much stronger, but still, that's not to everyone's taste. I don't want someone to look at this and think they have to go and shell out for Esper Sentinels or cards like that to make her good. I want to really have this here to tell you, Breena's great. Go give Breena a try. And if you're thinking Breena is too expensive, which I don't think she is because she just got reprinted in the Outlaws set, you can just use the kind of the cardboard piece she came with, because she's one of those commanders. Hold on. Look at this. This is it's probably not going to come across really well, but this is my Breena deck. It's the cardboard cutout. I do have the real card if someone gets, you know, a little salty about it and wants the real card. But I love this. It's worthless and it's really tough, and I like that. And so if you really want to, I'm sure it's like 50 cents, so you can budget for Breena with a 50-cent cardboard card. I can't believe they stopped making these. I love them so much. I hope everyone had a wonderful summer. I hope going back to school hasn't bummed you out. I miss school sometimes. It's a great time. I'm looking forward to Halloween weather and, just a good end of the year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you get to play Breena sometime, and good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.